Hi, welcome to using Google Sheets to understand student data. I'm David Bowman, the Executive Director of REC number 1 out of the Four Corners region. And we've got a lot to do. We have an hour and a half today. We've got an hour and a half tomorrow to finish it up with. But I think I'm going to do my absolute best to make sure that 100% of this is meaningful for you. The first thing I'd like to do, though, is I do want to share um, my screen. There is a form that I would like for you to fill out, which is serving as our attendance, and it's also going to give me some ideas about some of the things that you already maybe know how to do and what questions that you would like for me to answer during this time. Well, I will show you very quickly how do you get to it. If you just, and I'll just take just a moment to do this, but if you go to drive.google.com and you log in, it's going to take you to the home page of your Google Drive. And over on the left-hand side, let's see, this should be sharing. Over on the left-hand side is a button that says New, and right down there is Google Sheets. That will open up the sheets for you. I really not going to spend much time talking about how to use Google Drive other than that, but that's the simplest way to get to where we are. Drive.google.com, and then click on the new button and you'll have your Google Sheets. Or you can simply, when you are in Google Drive, you can see whatever else you've created there. And I'd be happy to spend a little bit of time after today's session to stay on and talk more about how to use Google Drive. But at this point, I think we ought to get moving here. A couple more folks. Admit and admit. Okay, great. All right, so let's jump into things. We have a pretty robust set of things to go over. Now, if you were in the Excel spreadsheet workshop, you're going to see a lot of the similar techniques, but applied to Google Sheets instead. And if I were to be asked which one do I prefer, if you've got a choice, I would definitely say that I prefer Excel. It has some additional controls and functionality, which is not possible on Google Sheets, unfortunately. But for the purposes of what we're going to be doing today, which is really how do you dig around in student data and pull out actionable information, you're going to find that there's a lot of really good techniques for doing that. So we're going to break this whole thing up into 3 pieces. First, we're going to look at a big data set. Now, I know that for many people, what you're really looking at is you're looking at one class, or you're looking at several classes of data combined together. So you might not be looking at really large spreadsheets with a lot of student data, a lot of lines and data, but when you start looking at results over time, you can turn out to have quite a few data lines, and sometimes it becomes a bit difficult to look at it and say, what am I actually looking at here? What does all this supposed to mean? So we'll start with a big data set, and we'll learn some of those techniques for making the sets more usable. From there, we're going to go to a small data set where we have a limited number of students. And then finally, it'll probably be tomorrow, but finally, we'll actually look at a sample set of single classroom data and be able to use some of the techniques to pull information out of it. And one of the big things I know we're always talking about is differentiated instruction. How do we start basically dividing our students up into smaller and smaller groups so we can provide very targeted and specific interventions or instruction to them? These strategies that we're going to use will help you to do that. So with that in mind, let's take a look at our first data set. And Sandy, I see your note about low network bandwidth, and I don't know what to tell you. There's no easy fix for that, but I'm hoping that you'll be able to follow along as closely as possible. And I will be posting, of course, the videos for this also, and for both today's and tomorrow's sessions, and I'll make sure I send you the links. So if there's parts where it gets choppy on you, hopefully that will help out as well. All right, so with that in mind, let's jump into Google Sheets. All right, I'm going to share a big data set. Now, I did send people links to these, so you can, of course, open them and then copy them to your own drive. So let's go to the big one. All righty, share this. Now, what you should be seeing at this point, or as soon as it comes up, is a fairly large data set. In fact, it's actually got how much? 3,109 lines. And for a lot of folks, this might be a bit overwhelming, like, holy moly, how are we going to get anything when we've got 3,109 lines of data, right? But the fact is, that's why we use spreadsheets. We do it to make it simple, because the techniques that we do when we have 5 kids are exactly the same as when we have 3,108 kids. So it's not scary at all. All it means is that we don't want to do it manually. I mean, the very last thing we want to ever do, I think, is to pull out our calculators and our pencils and start scratching our heads and adding and subtracting and crossing lines and doing anything manually, because Google Sheets will automate all of that for us. This is going to be redundant. Sorry, English teachers. It's going to automate it automatically. Okay. That didn't sound right. Okay. So there is a comment in chat, which is hiding right now. Okay, great. Let me just hide some stuff. All right. So the very first thing that we want to do, the very first thing that I do when I look at spreadsheets is I have to make it so I know what I'm looking at. So we're going to just do a couple of very quick things just to make it more usable before we start actually pulling out information. And the first thing that I see is I've got a lot of headings going across up here, and I have no idea what they are because they're buried. The text inside of the headings is more than can be displayed. So I've got to fix that first, because if I'm going to start looking at the data here, I have to know what these columns are. So let's do that first. And a quick keyboard, we'll do our very first quick keyboard shortcut. If you ever want to get back up to cell A1, just take me back to the beginning. All you have to do on your keyboard is hit Control Home. So here I am over here on F7 or so, Control Home, and I'm back at A1, right back at the beginning. That helps. Now, if I drop my cursor between 2 lines, I can actually drag the size of that down so I can actually see what's in there. Now I've got more room, and I can right click on that, on number 1 over there. I can right click on it, and it's going to highlight the entire row for me at once and give me some nice options about how I want it to be displayed. So for example, resize row, insert above, below, and so forth. Or I can go up here to format, and I can say, so my format menu at the top, text wrapping. And I want to change that to wrapping so that I can actually see the text that's in those columns. There. Now I know what I'm looking at. The other problem I'm going to run into here is when I start to scroll, those headings are going to scroll away. So I want to make sure that they're always going to stay there, because if I start looking around in the data, I'm very quickly going to get lost and say, wait, what am I looking at here? I don't remember what column P is, for example. So I want to lock that so that it's always going to be visible to me. and it's very simple to do. So I'm going to right click over here on 1 again to highlight it, and then I can simply lock it into place. Right. Oh, oh no. This is the difference between um, Excel and Sheets. It's not in the same place. View. Here we go. Freeze. View. Freeze. Up to current row, which in this case is just row 1. So I highlighted it to say this is the row I'm talking about. I go to View and then Freeze, and I'm going to say up to current row. Now you'll notice now when I scroll, they stay in place because I need to know what I'm looking at. I need those headers available to me. So just those very quick little things I now have, and I can now start using the spreadsheet. Although I'll give you one more very quick tip here, and that is you'll see that some of these, like academic year, the word academic is wrapped over, and if I look down inside, some of the information in there gets buried. Again, it's too long. So I want to expand that row just enough so that I can see what's in it. So I'm going to put my cursor up here right between columns D and E. And when I do that, instead of a little arrow cursor, I've got a double cursor. It's pointing in both directions. Well, when I have that, when I'm right between those two columns, I can double click and it's automatically going to expand just enough to show me what's inside. So another little way just to make this more usable. So for example, I've already done to some of these. So let's say I've got column V, and then what do I have? Late 1, late 3, but the text is kind of hiding because there's not enough room for it. So I'm going to put my cursor right between V and W up here at the top, and I'm going to simply double click. And it expands just enough so now I can see what's in there. So just some little quick tips to make it easier to find or to see what you're looking at. All right, now I need to go back to A1. So Control Home, and I'm now back at A1 again. Now the other, so these are just, functionality things just so you can see what you're doing. But there are some very easy techniques also for navigating around spreadsheets. And in the cheat sheet that I gave you had a list at the top called keyboard shortcuts for navigating. The most important one, without a doubt, is how do I get from the top of a column all the way down to the bottom of the column in one jump so that I don't have to just scroll and scroll and scroll. Turns out it's very easy to do. On a PC, I'm going to hold down my control key and then use my down arrow. And you can see I've automatically jumped all the way to the bottom, which is 3,109. Frankly, I don't have enough time to scroll, especially if I don't need to. So control arrow is going to take me either to the top, to the bottom of a column, or it's going to take me across a row until it gets to the first empty cell. So if I do control right, it took me right over to reading over here because the next one's a blank. So it's going to jump me over to the very next empty cell. So just some quick keyboard shortcuts. There's a couple of others on there. The last one I will mention is, as you see, when we start looking at students and their information, sometimes we want to say, just let me look at all of the grades and the grade column. Just show me the whole grade all the way down, right? And select it all at once. Well, there's a little trick, a little lesser known trick. If you hold down your shift key and use your arrows, it's going to select a range. But we can combine those two techniques together to say, how do I jump to the bottom of a column and select it at the same time? So jumping to the bottom is control down or command down arrow. selecting a range uses the shift key. So I can do both of those at the same time. If I hold my control and my shift together and then use my down arrow key, I have now selected from row 1 all the way down to row 3,109 in one swoop. Much easier than scrolling, and that single technique right there is going to be very necessary when we start building the formulas to look at the data. So keep that in mind. So I'm right there at A2 right now. I'm going to do Control Shift and then my down arrow key, and I've now selected all of the data in that column. Now you might be thinking, okay, that's clever and it looks very fancy, but so what, right? So what? Pretty much everything we're going to do from here on out is going to depend on that single technique right there. You know, with most things, there's always one trick. Like if I just knew this one trick, I could do everything else. And that's the one trick. All right, so having done that, all right, so we formatted, done a little formatting and so on. Let's do something very simple. So let's just do a quick sort. So here, let's say I want to sort students by the grades, and I've got second, fifth, fourth, third, kindergarten. I pretty much have all the grades available. So very quickly, how do I sort? Well, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here to data, and I've got a couple of automatic sorting options which aren't very useful. I can sort everything by column A from descending from lowest value to highest value, or the reverse of that. Well, sometimes you don't want to sort by column A. Like for example, in this case, column A is student IDs, and frankly, I don't care what the student IDs are. I want to sort by grade levels. So I need to do something a little different here. So let me go to sorts, sort range, create a filter. So I need to choose what I'm going to sort. Okay, so first I need to select everything because I want to sort all the rows and all the columns. So I can just simply do Control A or Command A for all, and it's going to select everything for me. And once I've done that, now I have something under data called sort range. And when I do this, now I can choose what I want to sort. Remember, I'm trying to sort by student grade here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say, yeah, we've got a header row. All right, that's the column headings across the top. Now I can choose what do I want to sort by. Here's all of my column headings. So I want to sort by student grade. You know, actually, let's do this a little bit more interesting. Let's sort it by school year and then by student grade, because I've got the 2017-18 year, the 2018-2019, 19-20. So let's actually sort it by the school year, the academic year first. And then when I click add another sort column, I can add another level of sorting. In this case, we will do student grade. So it's going to sort everything first by the year. So the 2017s will be before the 2018s, before the 2019s, and so forth. And then after that, within the academic year, sort it by the student grade. So let's see what happens. So I'm going to click here. I've got my two rows. I'm going to say sort. It's going to think for just a moment. And now look. There's all my 17-18s all together. And then there's first grade right next to it. And then next should be second grades. And next should be third grades and so forth. And when I get to the last grade in 2017-18, then it's going to go to 2018-19. So that's how you do multi-level sorts. Let's walk through with a different one. So these, let's see, this is school. what do we have over here? Let me double click. We've got New Mexico 1, New Mexico 2, New Mexico 1, 6, 8, 10. All right, so these are different schools or the different classes basically. So let's go to our data. Up first, select everything. Control A, select everything. Now, when we go to the data menu, we've got our sort range. And yes, our data does have a header row. That's the column headings across the top. So now let's sort it first by school. I'm going to add another sort column, and I'm going to say from here, now sort it by student grade or whatever you choose, and sort. It thinks now I've got all my AZ1s together. Farther down will be AZ2 and AZ3, and you'll see it's sorted by grade level within the school name. So that's multi-level sorting. If you've got any questions about that, jump in and give me a shout and we'll take another look at it. But as you're going to see, when we start applying some of the formulas that we use, we can actually pull a lot of information out of here without ever once sorting the data. All right, so let's take a look. Let's just look at the nature of a formula, because from here on out we're actually going to write some formulas that are going to look at the data and pull the information out of it that we want. So we've done that. Now you'll see that we've got a lot of different columns here: grades, years, and schools. And it's possible that these become important to our analysis, because maybe we, at some point we want to say, you know what, I've got all these kids here, but I'm only interested in the second grade kids. Or I've got all these kids here, but I'm only interested in the ones that have taken 2 tests or 3 tests. Or I've got all these kids here, but I want to know the ones that are in this school and in this year and in this grade, and I just want to find something out about them. So what we need to do is we need to give Google Sheets some information about where to look for the data, because Google Sheets can't read, obviously, right? So we can't say, hey, just go over to that student grade column and just show me, third graders, right? It doesn't know what that is. It can't read. So we actually have to name or tell it what these columns are. It can't read the headings. That we can do that. So we need to say this group of data is going to be given a certain name in Google Sheets. We're going to name our cells, and we're going to give a name to the references that Google Sheets can read. So it's actually pretty simple how we do this. So here we've got student grades, and I'm just thinking ahead that we're going to want to do some analysis around the grades. We want to separate, how did the second graders do compared to the third graders, compared to the fourth graders or the fifth graders, and so on. So I know that this column is going to be useful to me for analysis. So let's give it a name. So when we say, hey, go look at grades, Google Sheets knows where to look. All right, and here's how we do it. And I showed you the technique before about how to select an entire column. So we're going to select the entire column of grades and give it a name that Google Sheets can read. So again, to select the entire column at once, we're going to use Control and Shift together. I'm starting at right here on C2. That's the first grade. C. So I'm going to hold my Control and Shift and then simply hit my down arrow key. And it's selected all the way down to the very bottom. So now let's give it a name, right? And the way we do that is we come up here to data again, and there's an option on here called named ranges. Well, we've got a range selected of grades. Let's give it a name. So when I click on named ranges, I get this nice little box over here. And I will tell you, like I mentioned at the very beginning, I'm a much bigger fan of Excel than I am of Google Sheets, but I have to admit Google Sheets does this part really, really well. So you see, I've got data, the data sheet from C2 to C3109 already selected. I just have to give it a name, and I'm going to call it student grades. Now, when you give something a name, no spaces. It's got to be all together. So maybe we'll do something like this. And so I type it in, I'm going to click done. Now, whenever I want Excel to look at the grades, all I have to say is go look at that range called student grades, and it will know just where to look. I also know that I'm going to be using academic year for part of my analysis because I want to look at second graders from one year versus second graders from another year, let's say. So I'm going to do the same thing. So I start at the top of it, which is here 2019, 2020, Control and Shift together, down arrow. It's selected that entire set of data. So now all I have to do is say add a range, and I'm going to call this academic year. And done. Now you see I currently have 2 columns that have names. And if I just click on one of them, it'll automatically highlight it for me. I apologize for that. Okay. So I'm going to scroll on over here a bit more, and I know that somewhere down here is student gains, diagnostic gain. There we go. And I know that I'm going to look at the gains. How much growth did kids make, right? So I'm going to do this. It didn't actually get me all the way to the bottom, so I'm going to just keep doing it. And now, my little technique is not going to work here. My Control Shift down, because I've got some blanks in here, unfortunately. So in this case, we actually have to do it manually. So I'm going to just scroll to the bottom. I'm going to click the very last cell, which is down in 3109. Now, I'm going to scroll all the way up to the top. Another little shortcut for you, and this works with Google Sheets, it works with Excel, it works with Google Docs, it works with Microsoft Word. If you have something selected and you shift and click somewhere else, it's automatically going to select everything between the 2 points. So if I'm trying to highlight some words on a Word document, I shift at one point, I click at one point. If I shift and click somewhere else, it's automatically going to highlight everything in between. So let's try it. So I know that I have already selected column P, row 3109. I'm going to just use my little scroll arrow. I'm going to go to the top, and I'm going to shift and click P2. And you see it automatically highlights and selects everything in there. A little shortcut. So let's give it a name. So we're going to call this gains. And done. All right, so now we've got some named ranges. And because we've done that, now we can actually start doing some analysis. So let's take a look at how do formulas work, first of all. So let's say, just what does an actual formula look like? And they all look pretty much exactly the same. I'm going to take a moment. I'm going to pop over to my drawing pad over here. Now, every formula follows the exact same process. And grab a brush. It's always going to be the name of something. What are we going to do? And then we're going to have some type of conditions. What are we going to do within there? But the basis of every formula is simply, it's going to start with a equal sign in every case. For adding, we don't have a name. We just say this plus this plus this. So on our spreadsheet over here, I need to pop back over to the other one, which is right there. So if I wanted to add up, and this is just for demonstration purposes, let's say I wanted to add up the amount of time here that students are taking, I could say equals, and then I could just simply click, plus, click, plus, click, plus, click, plus, click, plus, click. So I'm going to say add up S2, S3, S4, and so on. When I hit enter, there's my total. If I wanted to subtract, it's going to be exactly the same. Let's say I want to remove the 19, so this value, and I can just click on it, and it will automatically put it into the formula minus the 19, and it gives me that. So that's the basis of how the formula works. It's going to be equal, and then it's going to have some stuff inside of parentheses. All right. So let's actually do something interesting here. So now I've got three things. I've got grades, and I've got years, and I have how much gain do students make. So let's figure something out. Let's find out how much gain our second graders make. And frankly, I don't know how many second graders are in here. We're gonna have to figure that out also. So first, we want to find out how many students do we have total, how many second graders do we have, and then let's find out how well did the second graders do. Now, we do know that there are some blanks in here. So I'm going to have to be able to separate out the blanks from students with scores at some point. I think we're going to come back to that though. So let's do this. Let me get back to the very top. And I suppose I should ask, I've blown up my screen to 150%. If you're having a hard time seeing what I'm doing here, let me know and I will blow it up some more. But let's go over to our second sheet. And let's just go over to a nice empty place over here. And I will blow this one up a bit more. Okay. So what do we want to know? We want to know how many second graders, right? We also want to know average gain by second graders. Two standard questions. Well, so let's answer the first question first. Now we've got a named range called gains, right? So all we have to do is we have to tell Excel, go look in, we got one called student grades. Go look in that column called student grades and count the number of second graders. And here is going to be our first, actually, let's do that second. Let's do one more question. How many students total? Well, this one's going to be easy to answer because down here in column A, we've got a line for every single student, right? So all we really need to know is how many students do we have listed there? Here is our first formula. So we start with the equal, and we're going to use a formula called count A. Count, give me the number, A for all. Count A. And what it's going to do is it's going to tell me where I tell it to look how many cells actually have something in them. Count A. So we're going to look down that first column and say, tell me how many rows have something in them, which are going to be the students. So the name of this formula is count A. And like every other formula, we've got to have a parenthesis because this is where we're actually going to do it. So what do we want to count? While it is still active, see, I've got a little blinking cursor. I'm going to pop over to the other sheet. I'm going to simply click on A, say just this whole column. Just give me everything, right? And then enter. 3109. So what does it look like? What did I just type? Count A. And then I clicked on the other sheet, selected the whole column, and said, count up that. Question for you. Is the correct number 3,109? Is that how many students I have? And the answer is either going to be yes or no. Do I actually have 3,109 students? Okay, the answer is going to be no. Because what count A does is it says, give me the number of rows that have something in them. And it takes me all the way down to row 3,109, except that first row is not a student. The first row is the header, right? That's not a student. The first student is actually the next row down. So even though I've got 3,109 rows with something in them, one of those rows is not a student. So I need to go one less than 3,109. And it's simple to do, stupid simple to do. So here's my little formula over here. Count A, count everything in column A. I just have to subtract 1 minus 1. And I should have 3,108 students. All right, just to show again how that works, let me pop back over to this, grab an eraser, just get rid of all of that. Okay. So I've got count A. So in count, or A for all, I gave it some range, right? And in this case, I said A through A. So just give me the whole column, everything that's in column A. So that's what I said, A to A. And that gave me 3,109. But as we saw, the first column is not a student, it's a header. So I need count A, everything in the first column, but then take off 1 for the header. And now I know how many kids I've got, 3,108. Now, why is this useful? You might think, well, that's kind of an interesting little exercise, but so what, right? So what? It's going to be interesting and useful because I want to know not only how well do the second graders do, but and how many second graders there were, but what portion of the overall student population are second graders? Well, I have to know what the total number of students is first, and that's why we spend some time doing that. All right, so let me go back over to big data. All right, now we're back to our questions again. How many second graders? So I want to look in that row, that column of grade levels, and I want to count the number of students in that column who are second grade. Because I've got a lot of kids mixed up over here, right, in this column. How many of them are second graders? So we're going to do something very similar. So whenever we just want to know how many, it's going to be some kind of a count. Count A for all, count if it meets a certain criteria, but it's going to be some kind of counting. And as it turns out, the formula for doing this to pull out, so we're starting to pull out information from the data set. Count, because we're going to be counting. If, count everything if it meets a certain criterion. So what's the criterion? Well, the count if requires 2 pieces of information. We have to tell Google Sheets where are we counting, and then we have to tell it what are we looking for. And this is where that named range becomes so valuable to us. we know that we have a named range called student grades. So count if. The first thing is, where are we counting? We're looking in the range called student grades. Now we could put in their data sheet column, was it C2 to C31? You could just type it in there. But you know what? That means you got to keep going back and say, wait, where is it? We give it a name, just look in the grades, and that's all you need to know. Makes it very, very easy. So where are we looking? We're looking in the range called student grades. What are we looking for? Comma. Now the next condition is going to be, we're looking for a 2. And you'll see on the screen that Google Sheets will give you instructions on what type of information you need to enter next. So right now, count if, it says the next thing to enter is range, and we did that. And then it says put a comma. We put a comma. Then it says criterion. What are we looking for? We're looking for the number 2. So we're going to look through the entire named range of student grades. We're going to find out how many of them are labeled 2 for the grade 2 and give us a count. 529. That is so much easier than scrolling through it and going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, because frankly, that's going to take a long time to do. So it's simple. We can even make this easier for ourselves. We can actually automate this, which is a lot of fun. So what grade? And I'm going to put a 2 here. Now, let's take that exact same formula and let's automate it a bit further. So equals count if. Where are we going to look? Student grades. What are we going to look for? Instead of putting in the number 2, I'm going to say whatever's in that next cell next to it, that's what we're looking for. So I'm just going to click on that. So whatever's in G6, that's what we're looking for in the range student grades. In parentheses, should be the same number. Well, how does this become even more fun? Watch this. We know that some of them are kindergarten. We know that some of them are first grades and on down. All right, so I'm going to put a little formula here, equals whatever's above it, in this case 1, just add 1 more to it, 2. And then I'm going to shift and use my arrow key and just go down a little bit. I want to take that same formula, which is just add 1. Take whatever's before it, add 1. Take whatever's before it, add 1. And I want to go all the way down to 12 all at once. So I've selected this first cell, which has this little formula. Look at the cell before it, add 1. I'm going to click and I'm going to highlight down. I want to copy that formula all the way down all at once. And there's a way to do it. So I don't have to keep typing it over and over and over again. I want to fill the cells going down. Control D for down. And it's going to take it and it's going to just fill it. Just keep on repeating that formula all the way down. Add 1, add 1, add 1. And I see I need 1 more. So let me select there. Control D to fill down. Now I've got 12. All right. So this is the grade we're looking at. And in about 10 seconds, we're going to find out how many kids are in every single grade. So we only have to do this 1 time. And then we're going to copy that formula all the way down. All right. So we want the count. So we know we got to get a count, but it's count them if they meet the criteria. So if. What's the range? Student grades. What's the criterion? Just look for what's next to it. I don't have to put in the actual grade. I just have to say whatever's next to it over there, that's what we're looking for. So I'm just going to click on it. So range, criteria, that's what we're looking for. In parentheses, All right, I have 134 kindergartners. All right, that's nice. Now let's do all the rest. I'm going to click on that formula. I'm going to just click and drag all the way down to 12. And I'm going to fill that formula down. Just look to the column next to it. So Control D. Now I know in nothing flat how many kids I have at each of those grade levels. And if I add them all up, I should have 3,108, unless there are some kids that don't have grades for some reason. So let's find out. I'm going to add up the whole column at once. Now, there's two kinds of adding in Excel or in Google Sheets. You have just a simple add. Take this plus this plus this plus this. But that means you've got to select each of those cells individually. Well, too time consuming. There is a way to say, hey, look at this range, this group of cells, and just add them all up at once. So instead of using the typical plus, equals this plus this plus this, we're going to use a command called sum, S-U-M, which is a fancy way of saying add them up. Parenthesis, and then what do I want to add up? I can just select this whole range all the way down to the bottom. Oops, I went too far. And equals. So instead of saying individual counting, we use something called sum, which basically says add up everything in the range that I've specified. And I just simply highlighted the range, hit enter, and it gives me 3108. So what that tells us is every student has been assigned to a particular grade, because the number of students we counted by grade and the number of students total are the same. All right, well, that's kind of interesting. But that doesn't get us to answer our question, which is, how did the second graders do, right? What are their scores? So I'm actually going to jump ahead of myself just a little bit, and let's answer the question, because this is a big deal, right? It's a big deal. How do they do? Okay. So if we want to find the average, the command is very simple. The command looks like this. Let me do a new share. Let's pop over to this. Where is it? Please move this new share. We want that. Share it. Okay. So let's just get rid of all that stuff. All right. So averaging is simple. So the command, how do you tell Google Sheets to average? You just say average equals average. And then in your parentheses, you tell it, what do you want to average? All right. So you can put individual cells here, A1, comma, A2, comma, B3, comma, B4, and it will find the average for all of those. Okay. Or you can do average and you can give it a range, A1 through, oops, let's get rid of that. Get rid of that. Through A20, let's say, and it will average up all of that at the same time. Or we can give it a name like gains. We could have said equals, let me get rid of all that. We could have said average, and we could say we have a named range called gains. So we could say just everything in gains, just average it all up. And that will give us some interesting information. So let's try that first. All right, so we have a column called gains. So let's say overall average gain. And I'll put it over here. So equals average. What do I want to average? I want to average all the gains. Well, where are the gains? In the range we called gains. The overall average is 32.37704 something 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 points. All right, that's probably too many. We don't need to be quite that specific. Yeah, because if we start getting down past hundredths, it's meaningless information. So I'm going to just click on that. And then up here, I've got two commands in my menu bar for increasing or decreasing the number of decimal points. Let's just back it up a little bit. Matter of fact, let's back it up to there. All right, 32.4. Because we can compare the second graders against the total. So, but we only want to look at the second graders, right? So we have to do something a little bit different. Now, when we were counting, we counted all the students, count all, count A. But we also had an option for counting just the second graders, count if they're a second grader. We can do something very, very similar here. We don't want to just average them all. We want to average them if they meet a certain criteria. And as you may have already guessed, the way we do that is average if. If they meet a certain criteria, then average it. So we've got to put some parameters in here. So let's start with our parenthesis. So the first thing we want to know is, where are the criteria? Where are we looking to determine whether or not we're going to include them? And the place we're going to look is student grades. So we're going to look in the column student grades to determine whether or not we want to average their score. All right, comma. And what are we looking for? So we're going to look in student grades. What are we looking for? 2. We're looking for the number 2 because we want second graders. And then what are we going to average? Now, so we've got student grades. That's required. Where are we looking? And the second criteria, what's the criterion? That's required also. If we don't put anything else here, what it's going to try to do is it's going to try to average the grades. It'll average whatever we put in there first, but we want to look somewhere else, right? We're looking in student grades to see if we want to include the score, but what we're actually going to average is over in the column called gains. So we have 3 things to tell Google Sheets. Where are we looking for the criterion? What is the criterion? And if we find it, where is the value or the score that we want to add? And it's in the column called gains. I hope you're seeing how useful it is when we name those ranges. It makes the formulas stupid simple to do this. Well, let's see. Let's hit enter and see how they did. 32.4. Nope, 35.4. So let me just back off a few of those. So the second graders actually did a little better than students overall by 3 points. Well, that's kind of interesting. Well, we can do something else. Check this out. Let me just move all those down for just a little bit. Let me assert some cells. Shift down. Okay. So here we've got grade. We've got the number of students. How about their average score? Right? So we're going to do the exact same thing. Equals average if. Average the scores if. And we have to tell it 3 things. So I'm going to put in my parenthesis. Google Sheets tells me what information do I need to supply. It's right there at the top. Average if. Criteria range is highlighted in green. So the range, student grades, comma. Now it tells me I need to include the criterion. And I'm going to say just look over 2 columns, and that's what we're looking for. So in this case, K. So whatever's in G7, which is K, that's what we're looking for, comma. If we find it, where are the scores of the values we want to add? Well, it's in the range we called gains, and close parenthesis. Kindergartners did 32.35. Now, We're going to simplify that in just a moment. But let me go ahead and highlight all the way down with my shift and arrow. Let me fill the formula down, Control D. And now I've got the average gain for every grade all at once. And what did that take? Seconds. Well, the only thing I think I want to do to this, these numbers are too long, way too many decimal points. So I've got two things I can do. I can either manually go up here to my menu bar and say decrease decimal points and just click it a bunch of times till I get where I want. Or I can just build it into the formula also. So I don't have to go back manually and do that. Let me show you something nifty. And, I did warn you, if you start learning these techniques, everybody's going to be knocking on your door like, hey, can you show me how to do that? Or worse yet, they're going to say, hey, can you do this for me? In which case you need to hand them your rate chart, your hourly rate chart, and say, yeah, I'd be happy to do it for you. Here's how much I charge per hour. That's actually only half a joke. Okay, so, but I will tell you there is money to be made in doing this. Just saying. So let me do something. Let me change my screen sharing. Let's take a look back over here at my template. So, and let me just erase that. All right. In case you're curious, that's Photoshop. I just set it up was to draw on. So we've got average if. And then we gave it range with the criteria. So let's actually call that, I'm going to simplify because my handwriting is terrible. So let's call that the criterion range, comma. And then what was the criterion, the grade? And then where is the place that we do the average range? Where do we find the values to average up? And that gave us some number, 32.487, blah, 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 all the way out there. Too much. I want to round it, basically, is what I'm trying to get to here. I'm saying I don't want all those decimal points. I want to take some number. I want to round it to just 1 decimal point. That's all that I need. And the way we do rounding, simply enough, is simply called round. And then in the parentheses, we say round what? Round what? What are we rounding? Comma, and then the number of decimals. That's what that says, just in case you can't tell. So if I want to round it to just 1 decimal point, I'm going to put in my 32.4, blah, 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 whatever that is, comma, 1. Just give me 1 decimal point. Now here's where it gets tricky. We have another formula already where we got that number, and that's that whole average if thing up there, right? Let me get rid of some of this stuff. Let's just get rid of that, and let's get rid of that. Okay. This one up here, this is where we got that long, crazy number, right? So actually, what I'm trying to round is that, the result of that, right? So all of this is the number that we're rounding, and then the number of decimal points. So how do we combine them together? Well, it's actually really simple. All we have to do is just take this right here, the formula for getting the average, and we just put it in this spot right here. And then we say comma, and how many decimals do we want? So we can actually take the one formula, which gives us that crazy long number that we don't need, and put it into another formula, which simplifies it and makes it easy to use. Let's give it a go. Let's give it a go. So first, let's get back to this. So we already have our formula here, which is all of this stuff. And that's what gives us that big number. I'm just going to modify it a little bit. just round it to 1 decimal. And you'll see I left that entire formula, average if, blah, 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 blah. I left it all just the way it's written, and I stuck it inside of the formula for rounding to 1 decimal point. And now what is it going to give me? 32.4. Let's take a look at another one. So here's average if, blah, 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 blah. That gives us the average. But I put it inside of rounding here for 1 decimal point, and now it rounds it to 1. So let's just fill that down. And now I've got something that I can actually use. I'm looking at these numbers. They're actually kind of interesting. Just a spot check. Boy, those 10th, 11th, and 12th graders really made big gains. You know, it might be worth just looking at this from a standpoint of making better sense of this. It might be worth graphing this out so I can compare them more easily. But just a spot check tells me something really, really interesting. 9th grade, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade kids did a lot better than the elementary and middle school kids. What might that mean? That would be a good question to explore further. See, but this is what we're trying to do. I mean, ultimately, numbers are meaningless, right? The numbers are just numbers. The point is, what we're really trying to do is figure out what's happening here. And what information can we get out of this that gives us an indication of how we are doing and how the kids are doing? Well, that's interesting information, right? I mean, numbers are pointless. Numbers are just numbers. It's what do those numbers tell us? What do those numbers mean? And how do we make use of them? And that's where it becomes really valuable and really powerful. Okay, so that's just a spot check. That may need some further exploration at some other point, but we are at 3:49 and we're not going to do it now. Okay, so we're going to go right up to 4 o'clock, so I got 11 minutes. And I will tell you this, we're looking at some big stuff here. We're looking at some of the big techniques like naming ranges and things like that. And we're also talking about some of the minutia around how do you just fill formulas and what does a formula look like and stuff like that. So we're kind of getting into the weeds here a little bit. So I will promise you this, just looking at my outline here, I will promise you this. Tomorrow, when we have our session tomorrow, we're going to take some of these big things, these sort of just operating procedures that we're looking at today, and we're going to actually go to student level and class level data. So this seems like, there's just, my brain is about to explode here, right? But we're going to take all this, we're going to apply it to some real data tomorrow. But now we're just sort of establishing the foundation of how do the formulas work? How do you copy formulas? And how, some of the basics of what types of formulas are available to us. So if you're getting a little like, oh, my eyes are rolling over and my stomach is clenching up and, I'm in tears, well, not that I hope. We're going to take all this and we're going to apply it to a much more manageable set tomorrow. But let's do one last thing. All right. One of the things that we saw is that some of these students don't have scores. They just don't have any scores at all. And if we see here the number of diagnostics the kids have, so this is just number of tests, right? Right. Some have 2, some have 1 test, some have, there's going to be some 3s down here, I already know that, and there's even some 4s in here. So if we're thinking about our students in our classrooms and our performance is being judged on the basis of how our students did, we have to make sure that the scores and the results are valid. If we have some kids that, okay, they took the iReady test, big deal. but they rushed through it. They just clicked anything just to get through it. Is that student's score going to be a good indicator of what they've learned? And will it be a good indicator of your instructional ability, your ability to teach kids? If they just blew through the test and got a score, probably a crappy score, but if they just blew through it, you really don't want that student's results to be part of your evaluation because they just rushed through it. It doesn't indicate if they actually learned anything. All it indicates is were they able to click buttons really quickly. So we want to pull out all of those students, in this case, whose scores we think are not a good indication of learning and not a good indication of your instructional ability. We don't want every kid to be included. We only want those students that did a good job on the test. And by good job, I don't mean got a good score. I mean took enough time to actually answer the questions. We see this a lot. And the nice thing is iReady will actually tell us if students have a flag. They've got red flags if students took on average less than, I think, 10 seconds or 11 seconds. They've got a yellow flag, which I think means under 15 seconds, something like that. We don't want those student scores to be counted in the evaluation of our performance. So we need to take them out. And let's just look through. So like, for example, there's a kid with a red rush flag. Well, and he doesn't have a gain, so that's good. Here's some yellow rush flags. We want to pull all those out. From an evaluation standpoint, I would say those scores are not valid. They are not valid. So what I want to do before I start looking at my performance is I want to be able to say, you know what? Find the kids that rushed through the test and mark them in some way so I know don't include them. Or the opposite is find all the kids that didn't rush, the kids with no flags, and call those valid scores. So I'm going to add another column here. I'm going to click on you. I'm going to right click on you, and I'm going to say insert one column to the left. And I'm going to call this valid scores. So what I'm going to ask Google to do is I'm going to say, go look at that previous column with the rush flags. If there's no flag there, call it a valid score. If there is a flag, if the student did rush through so fast they got flagged, that is not a valid score. So I need to use one simple little formula. This will be our very last thing today. I need to use one very simple formula called if-then. If some condition is true, then here's what I want you to do. Here's the way it's going to look. I'm going to say, actually, let me just draw it out for you real quick. Okay. And let me grab all that and delete it. Okay. Brush. Okay. So we're going to say if, and the name of the formula is if. Oopsie. Let's blow that back up. Okay. If. And we're going to check some kind of a condition. And we're going to determine whether or not it's true. If it is true, if yes, then do this, something, comma. If no, if it's not true, then we're going to do something else. So we're going to say, we're going to check for a flag. Oops, let me, Bowman handwriting. So we're going to look for a flag. If there is a flag, I think in this case, I'm going to say, let's call it 0. We can put anything there, okay? But in this case, I'm going to say, if there's a flag, put the value 0 there, like not valid. And if there's no flag, put a 1 there instead. Yes, it is valid. So that's what we're going to do right there. We're going to say, if that flag exists, do this. If not, do that. It's an if-then statement. If this, then do something. If not, do something else. All right, that's how it works. So for example, let me grab a green. Okay, so we're going to look for some value here. Okay, let's say, let's say there's a flag here. Okay, this is the flag column. And this one has no flag, this one has a flag, and that one has no flag. Okay, so I'm going to say if that column has a flag, then if it's yes, then put a 0. This one, if yes, put a 0. If no, well, there's no flag there, so we're going to put a 1. Here we would have a 0. Here we would have a 1. And then what it will do is it will say everybody with a 1 for valid, that's a valid score. All right, so that's what we're going to do. That's how we're going to build this thing. And it's really simple to do. So if, oops, come on, type. If, can I scroll over a little bit? Yeah, all right. Okay, equals if what? If the cell next to it has something in it, anything at all. So what we're going to be looking for is there anything in there? We want to say if it's blank, then it's valid. If it's not blank, then it's got a flag and it's not valid. So all we need to know is if that's not empty or not. Is it empty or it isn't empty? The way we say not equal, I mean, equal is an equal sign, but if we want to say not equal, there's no not equal symbol, so we have to do greater than or less than. Because if something is greater or less than a value, then it's not the value, right? If I say the value is 4, so is it greater than 4 or less than 4? And if it's greater or less than 4, then it can't be 4. So the not equal sign is greater than less than. What are we looking for? If it's not equal to, just a blank. And the way we indicate blank is simply 2 quotation marks. It's like text, right? Here's the word, but there's nothing in there. So if it's not equal to blank, means there's something in there. What are we going to do? Put a 0. And if it is equal to blank, what are we going to do? If it's not equal to blank, put a 0. Otherwise, put a 1. And let's close it. That should be a 1 because there's nothing there. So it's looking back one cell. It's looking for something which is not equal to a blank, which means there's a flag there. If that's true, it's not equal to blank, give it a 0. It's not valid. Otherwise, give it a 1. Now, we can put anything in there. We can put words in there. It doesn't even matter. 0 and 1 are just easy. All right. So I want to take that formula. I want to fill it all the way down. Unfortunately, it's blank all the way down, so I can't use my little trick. I'm going to use my scroll bar instead, and I'm going to say click there. Just at the very bottom, start there, highlight it, scroll up, and then remember, if we want to select a range, we click the first one, and then we shift click the second place, and it will automatically select everything inside. So just shift click, and everything's highlighted, selected. Now I just need to fill that formula down. So I'll use my keyboard shortcut, Control D. We fill it down, and now it's going to take that formula and it's going to copy it all the way down all at once. And you see, if this is blank, valid score. If it's not blank, 0, not valid score. So we will mostly pick up from here tomorrow, but I think I want to answer one last question, which will take 30 seconds. How many scores are valid, right? Out of all of these kids, how many actually have valid scores? Well, we've already done this. First thing I'm going to do, though, is I'm going to Control Shift down to select all of that. and I'm going to give it a name. So I've got it all selected. I go to data, and where is my name? Filter view, sort range, named ranges. There it is. Let's give it a name. Valid scores. So that whole range with 0 or 1 is now called valid scores. And done. So I'm going to come over here to sheet 2. How many valid scores? How many valid scores? We've already done this. Count if. Look inside the range and count it if it is 1. Equals count if, and it's valid scores. We've done this one before. If it's a 1, count it, otherwise don't. 2,750. Although we do know, I'm going to put an equal sign there. We know how many scores we've got, don't we? We have that many scores. So what I just said equals for here, equals that other value up there. What's the percentage? Equals, now we're just going to do normal math here. The number of valid scores divided by the total number. Let's reduce that. I'm going to click my little percent sign. 88.48% of the scores are valid. Or conversely, we know that we've got 11.52 that are invalid. We will pick this up tomorrow. We're actually going to go back over that one last time to start, because the whole if, then, yes, no is a little twisty conceptually. So we're going to do that. We're going to do that at the beginning of tomorrow, and then we're going to take some of these techniques and we're going to apply them to a classroom set of data. So that's today. So thank you all. I hope nobody's brain has exploded yet. It always seems to happen when I start talking about Excel or sheets or numbers or forms. Like, oh my God, right? You're going to sleep on it. It's going to roll around in your brain. You're going to come back tomorrow and go, oh, now it makes sense. I mean, that's just how brains work. So it's going to be fine. So thank you all for being here. I will see you tomorrow.